Good to be here in Katherine. I'm actually lucky to be here. As I was telling some this morning, I headed to the airport yesterday in Adelaide and had some dramas with security, and they said, we're going to need to get the police to look at your bag. And I went, oh, this doesn't sound very good. And then I went, oh shit. I'd been shooting on the weekend with my daughters and had some 308 cartridges in my bag, which doesn't go down very well in an international airport. Today I'm going to talk with a broad brush about my family, our journey, and hope to impart some insights and some of our learnings along the way. The brief from Reed was to ruffle some feathers, so if I do, I'm blaming him. The family background: my grandfather Byron started growing wool in the low rainfall country, some call it the desert, in South Australia in the 1930s, pioneering country that was otherwise deemed by the South Australian government to be of very little value. He's the right man at the right time in the right place, and he rode the wool boom to eventually become the country's biggest wool producer. And as a sort of student of numbers, the wool boom, for those who don't know it, and we talk about the value of wool at a pound, that was for 20 years, from about 1940 to 1960, was about 5 times the current price in real terms. And so I was just sitting here this morning, I thought, what does that look like for a feeder steer? And it's about $17 a kilo, or $6,000 for 20 years. So it was good times to be in wool. And Eddie Zenith produced close to 10,000 bales from 250,000 sheep. With sheep operations spanning South Australia, WA, and a ram breeding operation in New South Wales, and my father Hugh always ran just a few shorthorn cattle. But merino sheep, and specifically wool, was the main focus. In 1965, a cattle station called Granite Downs was bought in the 8-inch rainfall country in northern South Australia and held for about 30 years. But the South Australian government advised my father in the late 80s that when that lease came up for renewal, they'd be handing the pastoral lease back to the Aboriginal people. So he was on the lookout for some cattle country elsewhere. And in many ways, the silver lining, or the sheer luck to the story, was that at that time, there's quite a lot of country became available through the Western Australian Cattle Company going into liquidation in the West Kimberley region of Western Australia. And he subsequently purchased Meter, Blina and Kimberley Downs stations in the early 1990s. At this juncture, live export was very much live export to Indonesia was very much in its infancy. So winding the discussion back a little to my background. I grew up on a sheep station in South Australia. Parents sent me to boarding school aged 8 in New South Wales. I went to high school in Victoria, studied in Queensland, and then worked in the West Kimberley. So my wife would say I've been a bit of a roving dingo. After uni, the combined prospect of horses, cattle, a plausible business model and some romantic adventure dictated that I head north, and I subsequently spent 6 years on stations in the Kimberley. I started that life working for the Henwood family at Fossil Downs, who were very kind to me, and after that I ran the camp and subsequently managed Blina Station for several years. I had found my passion. After Blina, I spent 15 years as Joint Managing Director of the family business, Jumbuck Pastoral, based in Adelaide, now with oversight for 200,000 sheep 40,000 cattle, 160 staff across 12 properties. We expanded into the NT in 2014 with the purchase of Killarney, and then in 2021 with the purchase of Wave Hill, for the first time partnering with some external investors. In 2023, I departed Jumbuck to bring my vision of a modern pastoral company to life with the creation of Maclachlan Pastoral Group, with support from my wife, Sky, and my family. And this marked the beginning of my independence from Jumbuck, and unlike what's written in the program, I am not the Managing Director of Jumbuck Pastoral, but the Executive Director of Maclachlan Pastoral Group. So that's the history, and I thought I'd share with you today some learnings from my 30-year time along that journey. I first came to understand that a Brahmin was a good thing when in the cattle yards as a station hand at Fossil Downs, selling sale steers to Indo and the Henwoods had a beautiful drought master herd. When a single grey Brahmin ran through the pound and the Indonesian selector started ooh-ahing. And I clearly realised they were very fond of them. That's what they really wanted and what they still do. To this day, the imperative to understand our market cannot be overstated. Increasingly, and I dovetail into what Greg was saying, I see the need to travel to Indonesia and speak to our customer. We learn a lot from them and they respect us for showing the interest. As Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame preaches, being relentless in the pursuit of your customers' needs. Too often we get caught up in what we think matters and not what really matters to the customer. People are the lifeblood of our business, and there's nothing we won't do for them. We're a cattle business, but first and foremost, we're a people business. We allow our managers to manage and empower them to do so. This is a skill for me that's developed with age. I'm ambitious, and as a young man, that ambition often, I think, came across as just being aggressive, but we look after our people. I hope they feel that way about us also. Along the journey from Shorthorn to Brahman, we've seen production increases from mid-50% weanings to mid-70s, with improved genetics and improved management techniques. The management practices that we use today that we didn't use 20 years ago include preg-testing all dry females and spaying the outer types. We record the age demographic of all breeders. We time the joining of the bull to our maiden heifers to get the calf drop at the right time. Cattle are mustered and educated on horseback, not for the romance, but because we believe it pays. Our philosophy is to do the simple things exceptionally well. We don't chase fads. At the same time, we do try to be progressive. And finally, I would say that being conservative with our stocking rates has certainly paid dividends over the long game. It's all about getting more beef out of the grass we manage. More calves and more beef hanging on the bone. However, Brahman is currently part of an ingredient. It's not the star on the plate. As such, eating quality needs to remain a focus of the breed. I hate the term social licence, as Dean's just alluded to, but it's a matter of time before society will demand that we produce polled animals. And my advice is that the polled gene is not linked to any other traits. Combining calf loss mortalities as a result of dehorning, as well as a social licence issue, I see it being a no-brainer to chase polled-ness sensibly in Brahmans. And I make the analogy with the merino breed, with which in the early days, you go back 40, 50 years ago, there was a great reluctance to produce polled merinos. Today, a horned ram sells for about a 35% discount to a polled ram. For us, good management dictates that more data is collected and decisions are increasingly data-driven, less made by gut feel. And if I say that, midfield obviously put us to shame with the amount of data they're collecting and the AI, the tech they're using to drive their business. But I think that's the way we need to go too. As a consequence of chasing the bigger animal with a bigger eye muscle area, bigger bone, faster growth, higher carcass weight, also comes a diminution in calving ease and survivability. Recording birth dates and birth weights is going to be critical to this journey for the Brahman breed. We haven't tried to chase an animal that addresses the requirements of both domestic and live export markets because we don't think that animal exists that ticks both boxes. In our opinion, inevitably crossbreeding in the Northern Territory leads to a business producing an animal that is not suited to any market, to any particular market. We aim to turn off high-quality grey Brahman feeder steers or heifers at 18 months of age with good weight for age, temperament and even colour. Colour of hides is important to our Indonesian customers as well, though they may not be to a processor in Queensland. On bull buying, at best guess, I've now purchased personally about 2,500 bulls. And without too much hubris, I hope one of the better things I did when I took over the management of properties in the West Kimberley from my father was to cease breeding our own bulls and start looking for the animal that was best going to suit the business, the environment and the customer, and not specifically in that order. When buying bulls, for a producer to have the parameters and expectations clearly identified and agreed with the bull breeder prior to selection is imperative. I once purchased bulls from a guy who told me as I stepped out of my car into the yard, the rules are different this year, Callum. We're going to charge you more if you take less bulls. That's not a good idea. We try to forge good relationships with our customers and bull breeders. When things are tight, if they like you, they're more likely to do business with you. And in the course of doing business, there's always going to be sticky moments. At those times, you need to feel that you can sort things out amicably, that there's going to be give and take, not all take and no give. I get all bulls put up, soundness evaluated by a vet, pre-draft, important because I can't see the crack in the hoof or the lump on the testicles as they run through a pound like a vet can when they're standing in a crush. Semen tested for quality and quantity is essential. I've always selected bulls personally, not had an agent or someone else do it for me. They may be a better judge, but there's nothing like being invested in quality when it's your own money and your own business on the line. The paradox is our needs are constant, but also constantly changing. And I realise this isn't something that a stud breeder can accommodate readily. For instance, in recent times, fly bite has become a real issue for live export and costly for a producer. and therefore staying clear of bulls at a sale which have the propensity or irritation to fly by makes sense to me, regardless, you might sensibly say, of the heritability of the trait. Always take time to work on your business, not in your business. The legendary Bob Rowe, meat trader, who would be known to some of you now, no longer with us, was trying to get hold of me at Blina. My last month there, I was out the back developing waters and doing some fencing and building tanks. And I came in and he said to me, and it's always stuck with me, Bob said in his way, well, what are you in business for? And I said, I think just to get ahead. And he said, you're in business to make money. And the point I make is we all love to work hard, and we, particularly in this part of the world, I think, there's no doubt we do work hard, but working smart is probably equally or maybe more important. And last but by no means least, don't underestimate the need to make a start on your succession plans, and much earlier than you think. My advice is this journey starts when our children are 18 years of age and up, and continues from there. And no subjects are taboo, and absolutely nothing is off the table. Good communication and knowledge sharing is very powerful. Thanks for listening.